what do you believe are characteristics of an athlete that successfully goes through an academy?
Big one to start with, that question. So
we're not going to mess around.
Yeah, don't mess around. I think they have to have that singular-minded focus on, why are they there? What is that outcome they're trying to achieve? Because there's lots of different paths that we can take in sport, whether it's, recreational, you're trying to get a college scholarship, or you're trying to turn professional. And depending upon what journey or what path you're on, your experience within the academy is going to look very different. So here at IMG, we have a range of athletes that are going on very different journeys. So they have to understand what journey and what pathway they're on. Obviously, they work with the coaches and people like myself to understand that, and to simplify, like, what are their goals, what are their priorities, and then building their experience around those things.
To flip it slightly, what are some of the distractions, roadblocks that you think stop athletes successfully making the most of an academy experience?
I think a sense of belonging. As strange as that may sound, I think when you're with a cohort and with other peers, the reality is that we regress to the mean of that peer group. So unless you've got an exceptional peer group that are all trying to be pros or all trying to be absolutely the best, usually they'll regress to that average. And if you're not trying to be average, it's very difficult. I think intuitively we all want to belong to a cohort. So if you're part of a group and, they're like, hey, we're going to, miss practice or not do recovery or not eat properly. Well, it's very hard to go against that. You're going to, basically assimilate to those around you. So we talk to our athletes a lot about, yes, you've got to have peers and you've got to, be part of a social group, but be very cognizant of what that social group is doing for you. We can absolutely be friends with people who are on different journeys, but making sure that we keep laser focused on what we do. So sometimes fighting against that sense of belonging, which I think for all humans is inherently something we crave for. If we are, as an individual, trying to be a professional athlete at 0.00%, then you're going to have to do things very differently to the normal peer group that you're usually part of.
That's a great point. Not regressing to the mean of the group you're around, and it's so easy to do, especially if you go into a elite academy. You know that you've gone into an elite academy. It's full of it's definitely not the finished article, right? You're by no stretch of the imagination, you're probably where you want to be. So people attending IMG, they've probably got aspirations for, could be the pro game, could be college, could be whatever. But if you are looking around thinking that academy, just by pure existence of it and its definition, is going to take you to that end goal, you're probably misreading it in knowing what the actual percentages are of someone making it to that level that you want to achieve. And so you do have to be that slightly different one. I've always spoken about it, about being really comfortable with being different. And it's an unnatural thing to do. You just want to fit in. If you're a 14, 15-year-old kid, your one job in life is to fit in. And you're then telling that person, right, well, in order to get where you want to be and to achieve high-level status high-level achievement in an excellence in that field of sport, you're going to have to be different. And that is just, it's an unnatural feeling.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you said, Lewis, that really kind of resonated. One, you have to be an active participant in the environment. It doesn't matter what environment you go into, that environment will shape you, but it's not going to take you to where you need to go without your full investment and your full development. You can go into the best academy, best club in the world. You have to also have accountability and responsibility for your actions and the things that you do. The environment will shape you. So what we try to do is, we provide the support services, and we kind of use, Mustafa Sarkar's, challenge and support framework. Like, it is a high challenging environment, but we put a lot of support around you. Now, with that support piece, we're going to reach across the aisle and say, hey, these are the things that are available to you. Sometimes we'll, pull athletes a little bit and say, give them a little nudge and say, also, look, these are things you need to do. Of course, that's part of our job. But you can only meet athletes so far. You can't force athletes to do certain things. So if they're not going to do the right things when everything's laid on a plate for them, then they're going to struggle. They're not going to potentially reach, where they could reach. But again, that is part of the learning process. And I don't cast any, judgment on young people. I'd have probably done exactly the same things. I'd have probably been goofing off with my friends and, not necessarily eating right and doing all the right things. So they have to learn, and they'll, some of our athletes learn through mistakes, and they learn through setbacks. And, if their goal is strong enough and their desire and the motivation, and they have the talent, the genes, all the rest of it, they have the system and the environment in place, and they have to take advantage of it. So it's that kind of combination, as you just alluded to.
You plug in Mustafa's matrix there, which is obviously he's been on the show before. But how do you? And I think we spoke about it before. But from a practical point of view, how do you, especially with the numbers that you have coming in and out of that academy, how do you tailor enough support to be there to, and I don't like using the word catch an athlete, to be like it's their catch. I almost like to think of that support as being kind of behind them, saying that I've got your back type support. But how do you take enough of that away to make them autonomous in what they're doing and intrinsically motivated towards whatever ambition they've got?
So the environment in itself at IMG, by default is incredibly challenging. There's high demands on academics. They play and compete and practice a lot. So minimum, usually practice whatever sport they're in, it's 2.5 to 3 hours a day, plus strength and conditioning, plus their additional classes, whether it's mental performance, leadership, nutrition. Then they've got a full academic schedule that some of our students are aiming to go to Ivy League institutions. So they're some of the best students in the United States. And then you have, other things that are pressing on your time. So the environment in itself is created to be very challenging. And we don't shy away from that. It's not necessarily an environment that is conducive to everybody and that works for everybody. With regards to the support piece, a long time ago, probably Nick Bollettieri, as the founder of the academy, saw that, and he was pretty legendary of pushing athletes, but also recognizing, hey, we're going to push athletes, we need to support them. So what did that look like? We needed to make sure that, physically from a strength and conditioning side, we need to make sure we have athletic trainers to deal with, rehab, prehab, deal with injuries, but then also mental performance. We also need to make sure that we support them in their path to college. We need to make sure that they're happy and they're healthy and they're doing well in their academics. So right now at the academy, if you put the student athlete in the middle, the amount of adults that they come in contact with, that their sole job is to create an amazing experience for them, is pretty outstanding. So some are very proactive in that support, and then some services might be a little bit in the background, to you alluded to. So for example, we have clinical psychological services on campus that are available, but not all our student athletes necessarily need or want to access those. But for some of our students, that's absolutely first and foremost a priority for them. So depending upon what those student athletes need, in a very pragmatic way, what I could tell the listeners, each week, the support group that works in that sport. So for example, if you work in tennis, all the support staff, including, some representatives from sport, but their strength coach, their mental coach, the leadership coach, nutrition, someone from academics, someone from student life will meet and make sure that we'll talk through the student athletes in tennis, identify, the kids that are doing well, but also identifying, trying to catch those athletes that are perhaps trending in the wrong direction. We identify red flags, we identify orange flags, those that are probably on the precipice of maybe becoming an issue. And we also use data. So we'll use data. So things like, we capture, weight on a regular basis to make sure, we're not trending in the wrong direction weight wise in terms of eating disorders. Our strength and conditioning staff, monitor data from, power output to make sure, we're managing potential burnout. And obviously there's a lot of subjectivity too in terms of our discussions around, what we've seen and heard from our athletes. So every week a team is meeting to discuss all those athletes in those sports. So in a big picture, each student athlete comes in contact with that many adults. We all have this pastoral responsibility to take care of our athletes. And if you see something, you have to say something. So if we see an athlete turning in the wrong direction, we're probably not the only one. They're probably acting up in school. They're struggling in student life. So again, we're trying to provide that holistic care. It's not easy. We're 1,500 athletes, as you can imagine, and we're certainly putting, systems and processes in place. But that's how we kind of manage that support piece.
It's a huge machine. Is there a trend or a different way in which you've had to support people in probably the last 5 years? It's well spoken about now, how new generations have new different problems. I'm experiencing it with people I work with. I regularly have parents reaching out. I regularly have the athletes reaching out themselves. But in a institution, an organization, is there a way in which you've had to change the support to match the new needs of a younger generation?
I'm not sure necessarily that the needs have changed. I think the information that we receive and the data we have access to means we're probably asking different questions and we're approaching our athletes. I think athletes in general have always, struggled with, mental health challenges, have always struggled with, potential burnout and, homesickness and, social peer relationships. They've always struggled with that, but perhaps they haven't been asked about it. Perhaps they haven't been approached. Perhaps they haven't had the adult there to say, hey, I've noticed this. So we're trying to be a little more proactive than reactive. It's very easy to, be reactive and put systems in place when something serious happens with an athlete, and that happens from time to time, whereby all of a sudden we have a real scare on our hands. But we need to be proactive and make sure that we put the systems in place whereby we're catching things early. I'm often asked the question, do a lot of your student athletes burn out because there's such are the demands? And I say, my kind of flippant response is, if they burn out, then that's our fault, because we've had so many data points to catch them and we've let them down on that journey. So I'd say actually burnout, from my experience being here 7.5 years, is actually very low, which would surprise people, because we use the data. We have eyes on them every single day. Is it demanding? Absolutely. Do we take care of them? Absolutely. Are we perfect? No. We're always learning. So to go back to your question, Lewis, are there things that are a little bit different? I think our student athletes are more willing than ever to ask for help and to talk about things, especially around mental health. I'd say in the last 5 years, the amount of athletes that are willing to put their hand up and say, hey, I would like additional support, that's definitely increased. Is it because the actual demand for mental health has increased, or is it just they're feeling more comfortable? I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I think it's that willingness to ask for help, and it's also our willingness to ask better questions and to realize, where can we do a better job as adults supporting them?
Are you seeing any sort of anecdotal evidence of there being more male or females asking for help?
Anecdotally, no, actually. I think we have a big international population. So we have about 50% of our international students. I think, and we know that from the research, culturally, some cultures don't necessarily ascribe to mental health or they see mental health and frame it differently to US and westernized cultures. So some of our Asian students and our South American students think, and their parents think, very differently about those issues. Not rightly or wrongly, they come up from a very different culture of how to understand and how to address those issues. So we, potentially we may see something that we think, that student athlete could really do with additional support, but their parents may feel differently. And we have to respect that and understand there are cultural differences. So on the gender division, I'd probably say not so much. I could probably find some data, but I don't think it would be too dissimilar from 50-50. I think there's more of a division on our international students, but I would say the pressure on our international students is incredible because they're living away from home. So they're actually a group that needs a lot of support, and they do get a lot of support. It just might not be clinical psychological services.
It's interesting because I only asked that. I've spoken to an American college recently, one of the mental performance coaches. He's going to be coming on the show fairly soon. And he still found that there was a general reluctancy to come through the door to whether it was a mental performance coach, a psychologist. It could even be up all the way to the point where you're going to see a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, whatever it might be, that he felt that there was still a reluctancy in some of the male athletes, and especially in sports such as football, and I would probably stack something like rugby over here into that, the macho sport, you're just physically hitting people. Do you know what I mean? It's the pure physical domination feeling and testosterone driven sport that you can. Whereas but then also on the flip side, sometimes he said the gymnasts, maybe leading from their perfectionism, would not seek the help as well, which is quite an interesting one, because you would think, okay, maybe it's more female dominated in that side in some stages. But yeah, it was interesting to hear that he found that there was still a bit of a reluctancy. So I'd never really considered the cultural difference as well.
I would say to that point, and it's an excellent point. I think, does stigma still exist around psychological services? Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I would differentiate at IMG is with mental performance is that whoever designed it as the way it's designed and how we currently deliver, our student athletes have mental performance pretty much as a program, as a class, or as a workshop with a mental coach every single week, and then see their mental coach throughout the week. So it's not one-off. It's integrated in with the delivery. It's integrated in with their sport. It's, even if they're an athlete coming from the outside that's never had mental performance, they assimilate pretty quickly to their peers who may have had mental performance for the last 5 years. It's like, oh, that's your mental coach. Okay. It's kind of like, oh, that's what we do here. We do mental performance. Does every athlete, buy in? No, of course not. Like it takes time, and we build relationships. One of the ways we try to do it is getting coaches and making sure that the coaches are supporting and making sure the coaches are reinforcing it. And again, it's the same with our coaches. Some of our coaches have never had access to a mental performance coach. How do we use this person? How do we do these things? So there's a big educational component. So I think on the mental performance side, we have less barriers, and I think there's a lot more comfort level because our mental coaches are integrated in with this sport. We just had a girls' national basketball team go to the national finals, and our mental performance coaches sat on the bench in the national finals, and they travel. So that's a little bit different to other environments. The clinical piece, we help triage into our psychological services. Yes, there's still a stigma, there's still a reluctance, but I think it's a little more accepted in Western culture and in the US than even perhaps the UK. Is there sport-to-sport difference? Yeah, there's still some sport-to-sport differences.
Yeah, well, I think I've spoken to a few people about this, the tall poppy syndrome that exists here in the UK and in Australia, where I've spent a lot of time. That is a real thing and a real barrier, especially in sport. And what you've spoken about there is this full integration into the village that is the IMG Academy, that has now made it a part of the furniture, and it's over there. There's your mental performance. It's welcome, and no one, and normalizing it, whether you take it or not. Whereas here, I find and it might be similar in the US outside of an academy, for example, but in teams over here, there's still so many. I spoke to a Premier League rugby team this year, and the coaches, they just don't know what to do. They don't know what they need. They don't know what they want. They don't know what it would look like. They're really still trying to figure their feet out a little bit, and it's quite interesting to see, because it's being driven also by those coaches understanding it and really maybe having had experience in it. There's a few coaches I know, for example, here in Championship football, one of the sides that will probably get into the Premier League this year, the head coach there, he's really into it himself. So therefore it's driven, becomes normalized massively. You sign a player, this is what we do. It's no question. Whereas trying to get a coach that's maybe not had that experience for a long, long time, much harder. So how do you integrate it into being a part of the coach's the coach's lifestyle for themselves, or is it something that they're presented with and they've kind of got to buy into it?
I would say at the academy, there's two different ways I think about it. One, it is integrated into the business model. So what I mean by that is parents have paid for these services. So parents have paid for mental performance to be part of their child's sport experience. So in that sense, coaches have to provide access. Now, coaches can, if they choose to, make that still very difficult. So it's our job as mental performance coaches to build relationships with those sport coaches and, to be honest, provide value. So sometimes it takes some coaching from myself with our mental performance team to say, when they get upset that maybe the coaches cancel the session, or maybe they're not getting the access to the teams and the athletes that they think they deserve, I put it back on us. Like, we have to provide value. We have to show the coach and the student athletes that our services and what we do is of value to them and is of value to the young people which we serve. So yes, we have access kind of by default, but coaches can make our lives very difficult. I would say the majority of the coaches that work here, we work kind of hand in glove with them, and they're exceptional. And some we still have to kind of manage that relationship and work through them and make sure that, we're also fulfilling their goals and their desires. Ultimately, we've seen it consistently in our data that the coach, the primary head coach, is the most important person in our young people's experience. So we would be foolish not to then say, hey, how do I make sure that I am supporting the head coach as well as possible and making sure that, I'm giving, my best to the student athletes. Now, my role as a director here, sometimes if our coaches are doing all the right things and not getting access, then we have to have some difficult conversations with the directors of the sport and figure out, well, what's not working, why our sessions getting canceled, why are they not getting access? And honestly, that's just relationships, and sometimes you have to deal with politics. But I'd say 99% of the time, our coaches are exceptional, including our mental coaches. But again, we have to provide value. We can't just expect it to be given to us.
When was there a definitive time when it really got brought into the business model, or since its inception, has it always been around, or is it a more recent thing where you've been like, this must be a part of the program?
Yeah, don't quote me in the exact year, but I think probably 9 or 10 years ago, it used to be a program that it was purely sport, and then everything else, I think strength and conditioning was included, then everything else was a la carte. So if you wanted mental performance, parents would pay on top. And eventually the business model changed to there was almost one inclusive price, and all the services were bundled in, so that, back in the day, our mental performance coaches used to have to sell and call parents and sell individual sessions. So that changed, I think, about 9 or 10 years ago, and really that inclusive, holistic development and think more broadly. So yeah, that was just a couple of years before I came. So I've definitely been a beneficiary of that change. I don't know that I'd love to sit on a phone calling parents to sell mental performance services, but it's definitely opened up the gates for our staff to do good work.
But kind of going back to the point of coaches adopting it, not adopting it, have you seen trends in coaches that do adopt it? There's greater success, performance, as opposed to coaches that don't?
I'll answer the question kind of in a roundabout way. I always think about, well, how do I engage the coach in the services that we're doing? So if I worked a lot of time in tennis, I have a background in tennis, but I would say, I have this idea, you're the expert. What drills, activities, what do you see? What activities can we use that would, it has this experience. How can you get involved? Do you mind, after I finish this, these are the key points, do you mind hitting on some of these key points from your own experience? Some of our coaches have won Grand Slams. They've been top 10 players. I want our athletes to hear from them more than me. I will maybe, build them up and put them on a pedestal and make sure that they have some of the key talking points. But when we do that, the coaches feel empowered. It's not someone else coming into their space taking over. So that's kind of, I've always felt, and it's nothing new, Lewis, but working through our coaches is absolutely essential. And again, providing value. How do I support the coach? I'd go out, is there anything you need? Like, how can I support, oh, coach, that was an excellent session, making sure that I gave, as much positive feedback as possible. With some coaches that have been here a long time, they understand it. I think sometimes when we, as I alluded to, when we have younger coaches or new coaches come in, maybe they've been a really successful coach in another environment, and then they've come into this environment, they don't feel like they want to use a mental performance coach. They're like, I was a college coach. I did everything. I did the strength and conditioning. I taped the ankles. I did the mental performance. Why do I need you? So again, I think it's, being present, turning up, providing value, speaking to them, assisting when needed. And ultimately, you'll break down those barriers. What do you do again? Okay, well, these are some of the things. And I usually see when coaches, inevitably throughout an entire year, things are going to go up and down. When coaches start to struggle, the human, they're going to reach out to someone and say, oh man, that was a rough game on Saturday. Okay, they've opened the door, right? So you've got to look for those moments whereby they're opening the door to you. What do you think? What do you see? Those questions, like, you got to be ready to go. And at tennis, we would always have, and I tell my coach all the time, they're on a water break. Do you want to say anything? I might have nothing planned, but I'm never going to say no. I'm always going to say, yep, I'm ready to go. And I hear that all the time. Coach will just suddenly say, hey, you got anything? Boom, I'm gonna have something. I've got to be ready to go. I can't say no because next time they may not ask you. So do we see trends? Those are some of the things I kind of think about. And again, it's education, it's support. You do a good job, eventually, you'll get access.
So from a mechanism within the business to you take a new athlete on board, you're gonna have some form of assessment of them, then plan, and then intervention and integrate it. Talk us through that whole process. What does that look like? Because there's obviously a vast range of needs that an individual might need. There's a vast range of interventions, but what is the sort of structured system that you go through in order to try and get to the best result?
So we started on a journey probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I come from an academic background. I was a faculty member for a long time and did research. So I wanted to be data-driven in the work that we did. So when I was head of the department, I really wanted to make sure the work that we're doing is, data-informed. It doesn't have to be data-driven, but it does have to be informed. So we went on the path of working with a couple of researchers out of New Mexico State University, and we developed a valid and reliable mental performance assessment. So our student athletes take that assessment, and through the whole psychometric development, it's identified 5 key factors that we look at. So we started out with I think 15 plus factors with 100 something questions, and through kind of confirmatory and factor analysis, not to bore people, we got it down to 5 factors. So confidence, focus, resilience, commitment, and handling pressure. So those are our 5 factors, and we use the data to start to inform and start to put a puzzle piece in place to say, okay, our team or our group, because most of our delivery is done in groups and teams, our U16 soccer team here, they're struggling, or they're lower on resilience. Is that something that is important? So we have that data point. Then it's, let's speak to the coaches, let's speak to the athletes, let's observe, let's use our own expertise, especially if we've worked with that team you might have worked with some of those athletes for multiple semesters, even years. And then where are they on their developmental journey? So understanding the assessment is one of those data points. So once you do that, then we'll come to a conclusion and say, okay, let's just say we're going to work on resilience. We also work with the mental coaches within that sport. What I mean by that is each sport may have multiple mental coaches. So soccer, for example, we have, over 400 athletes in soccer, which is 250 on the boys side. You may have 3 U16 teams. So we have, 2 or 3 mental coaches that will work in soccer. So we want to make sure that what I'm doing in my programming, if I've got one 16 team and someone else has got a 16 team, that we're not completely off, because players move teams. So again, it's kind of the art and the science, understanding the data, understanding the needs of the team and the athlete, working with the mental coaches in that sport, working with the sport coaches and say, okay, this is my program. And then ultimately what we build out, for lack of a better term, would be a curriculum for resilience. So we'll build out, okay, we know roughly every week we're going to have potentially one session, formal delivery. We're going to see them at multiple touch points. We may travel to tournaments. If we're going to develop resilience, what are the skills that we need to kind of improve on to impact resilience, and what does that look like? So each of our mental coaches builds out what we call a mental performance plan. And then we have multiple data points that we evaluate that plan. But there was a lot there, Lewis. I'll stop for a minute.
No, yeah. So just where that then begins to probably rubber meet the road from a intervention, from because I think what I'd love to get across here is there's a lot of people that may know that this is valuable part of their game. It's a part of their life they really want to engage with. But what the hell it looks like sometimes can really scare them. And that idea of like, what does this look like? How do I actually make this work? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? Like I need to see something in the shop to know what I'm buying, right? So what is it that it actually looks like? Let's take confidence or resilience, whichever one you want to go with. But like, how would that look? And you can either use an anonymous example or make one up. But yeah, what would that athlete actually experience? What would those sessions involve, so that you can kind of get a feel of what it looks like?
Yeah, so we take something like confidence, which for me, the terms we use around here is that's a psychological attribute that we're trying to improve. So we'll think, what are the skills, what are the mental skills we need to improve that underpin confidence? So self-talk, body language, we may use breathing, we may use routines. What are the fundamental skills that we're trying to work on? That imagery, what are the fundamental skills we're trying to work on that will ultimately improve our confidence? For me, when I'm thinking about it from an athlete's point of view, when I'm thinking about it from a mental coach's point of view, is what is the experience I'm trying to co-create in that session? So if I'm working on a tennis court with an athlete and I want to improve their experience, when they walk off that court, I try and start at the end and work backwards. When they walk off that court, what is the experience they've had? If I want that athlete to walk off that court feeling $1 million, I want them to have had a session that has increased their confidence, which is a tough ask. But if that's the aspiration that I have, what do I need to do? What are the skills that they need? What's the knowledge, and what's the activities within that session? So from a knowledge point of view, sometimes we'll do classroom discussion, but what are some of the fundamentals we may talk about as it pertains to self-talk? So, if you just say talk nicely to yourself, well, we haven't really increased the knowledge. They don't know when to do it. They don't know how to do it. So there might be some psychoeducation. What are the skills? Okay, how do you actually talk to yourself differently? How do you do imagery prior to a serve or return? What does good body language look like? So we'll talk about what skills are we going to work on, and then ultimately, what are the activities that give them the time or the opportunity to use those skills. So if I take tennis, and we may do, okay, we're going to work on a pre-performance routine. Why? Because ultimately, it's that controllable element within our performance domain. It's really important for serve and return. So okay, well, we'll install something in a practice domain, but whereby you have to go to your towel, you have to take 20 seconds, you have to say a positive affirmation to yourself, you have to have a focus cue, you have to show good body language, you have to use a routine. So again, I'm giving a lot there, and we may just break it up, but we make sure that those skills are part of that practice. So the coach, I'll say, look, I want him to use the routine. What's the game we're going to play? Okay, it might be a game to 10 or a game to, every point counts as 2. You have to win 2 points in a row to win 1 point. All sorts of different games that we can play. But we need to make sure that 20 seconds is protected. And if they don't do that, then there's consequences. So again, thinking about the experience, making sure that we start with the end in mind, we give them the psychoeducation, we make sure that we reinforce the skills. And again, this is not, I made it sound like one session, Lewis. This is across the entire semester. So we may work, and we work on something for an entire semester. So confidence might be the whole focus for the whole group for that entire semester. Now, individually, we may have athletes that, have great confidence and they want to work on something else. So that's where one-on-one individual time will come in. So that's what it may look like. Again, if I'm taking it to a coach, if I'm saying, how does a coach think about this? A question I often ask them is, how do you want your players to think, feel, and act differently? And get real concrete on that. Write it down. Because there's something you want there. How do you want them to think differently? How do you want them to feel differently? And how do you want them to act differently from a behavioral point of view? Once a coach tells me that, I say, okay, this seems to be what you want. And I can also ask the same question of an athlete. How do you want to think, feel, and act differently on the court or on the field or on the, whatever it might be on the diamond? So that's kind of a guiding question I can use.
It's a good question. Just remind me of what the 5 factors are that you come to.
Confidence, commitment, focus, resilience, handling pressure.
Do you stack those in a particular order? Do you believe one is foundational to the other? And it's sort of, because what I'm thinking of is, so personally, I'm going through this, a physical training change that I'm doing. I've gone into a massive Americans say hypertrophy, we say hypertrophy. And I'm going through that phase at the moment, so I'm just putting on a bit of muscle, and there's big periodization that goes with that, with the physical planning. So what you've spoken about there of using maybe one factor such as confidence and starting there and doing it over the entire semester, it's similar to how I view the training the body, is you sort of build that hypertrophy and stack it as a foundation, and then I may want to change that to speed. I may want to improve endurance down the road, whatever it might be. So from a mental performance point of view, which one becomes the foundational piece to your planning?
So I'll tell you anecdotally where we're leaning towards. We also have an athlete development model. So that we're developing for IMG, it's pretty close to being finished. And obviously mental performance is part of that athlete development model. As you'll have seen, and many listeners will know, kind of LTAD stuff. So where does it stack and what's the ordering? It's not an easy question to answer. What we're going to do is be driven by the data. So right now, the data, when we assess, we get about 1,000 athletes, between 1,000 and 15 athletes take the assessment, and they're going to take it 3 times a year. So we end up having a lot of data. Over time, we want to see, based on age groups and based on ability. So it's us. What's a little wonky is sometimes our age and our ability don't match up, but from an age perspective, is there from the data point of view, is there categorization whereby we're a little bit lower in confidence when we're younger, and these are the things we need? And so we're going to lean on the data to really pass that out. Anecdotally, we probably know the bookends, and this is from our own experience, but we could end up being proven wrong. Handling pressure will probably be towards the end. If we're thinking about, as we progress through, we've got our 16 to 18 year olds, they're starting to reach the higher echelons of their high school level sport. Some will be looking to transition into big Division 1 or even professional sports. So they're getting judgments from colleges. They're getting, coaches looking at them. They may represent federations. They're playing in international tournaments. So handling pressure is going to be at that far end. At the bottom end, we think of fundamentally, we think confidence. As an athlete comes in, starts their sport, is learning their sport, that is something that we think is absolutely foundational. The order of confidence, resilience, commitment is a little bit up to debate. We can kind of pass them around. Ultimately, I don't know that model, we may have a framework in place in the next year. I don't know that that's going to be prescriptive, because we're still going to be client based, and we're still going to be addressing the needs of that group and team. So we're not just going to make sure everyone fits into this framework. But I would say we've got handling pressure one and confidence in the other. And then the other 3, I think you could probably move them around a little bit. But again, we're going to lean heavily on the data to tell us. And it's not just the age, but also the ability levels, what might be most important. We haven't quite got there yet, but it's a great question.
And your model, your assessment that you've created, obviously it's a bespoke assessment that you've created, and that's built off those 5 factors? Or that actually took 15 and then you came to that 5, which then created the model?
Yes.
Right, okay. This is I kind of, as I asked the question, I thought I feel you might say confidence as being the foundational piece. I've found that, but I've also found really interesting working with athletes that many want that performance confidence, but actually they need self-confidence. And it's not necessarily even anything connected to the sport or the games that they're playing, but also something probably want to put to you is, how do you try to navigate, and I'm finding this more, is that I think society is infiltrating the sports domain much harder as well, due to social media, to just access of information, seeing what people are up to. And I'm seeing confidence rates sort of plummet, essentially. I've never really seen a generation less confident in sport as I am seeing right now here in the UK. Can't speak for the US, obviously. However, I have US athletes that I work with, and they are very conscious of their lack of confidence in certain areas. But how do you get them to stop worrying about their self-worth being put onto the actual results, because they want to be at the college level? And I mean, look, America is, I see what America's doing with its NCAA athletes, where they're getting millions of followers. Was it Caitlin Clark, the basketball player right now? Over 1 million followers on Instagram. Not even a professional athlete yet. And you're like, this is the expectation and the sort of reality that actually exists in that sport for a young person trying to make it in, to try and find their confidence on their own journey and not see someone else's and compare themselves, and to see all these externals. How are we trying to block that out, really? I think you've got more noise closer to those age groups than we do here, right? We don't have college athletes being sort of lauded like that. So I'm really interested how you sort of create them on their own journey rather than seeing this huge one that's in front of them.
It is a challenge. I think the reality of social media, something we talk about a lot. This generation, the high school generation that is right in front of me right now, they haven't known anything different to social media. They've grown up with it. They've grown up with an iPhone. They've grown up with access. So that's a little different to in planning our own backgrounds. Like, when I was growing up, I didn't have that, et cetera, et cetera. Our coaches sometimes bemoan that, but our student athletes have always had that experience. So it's probably not alien to them. I think what we do try to do, and Mel Performance is part of the support services, but we have other departments. So we have a leadership and character development department, and their job is to support them and develop them and get them to think of themselves as, more than just an athlete. And what are the things, my values, what are my principles, what are the things that are really important to me beyond being an athlete? So instilling a sense of values and understanding, what does it mean to be accountable? What does it mean to be a person of virtue? And what does it mean to have integrity? So when we have, and it's very difficult, but when we have individuals, we have young people that have a strong sense of values and who they are. We have, athletes from phenomenal families, and they've already instilled some of these things in them. When you have those roots, sometimes that external noise can be lowered. It's not going to get eliminated, but it can be lowered. So we've got to make sure that we support them in those domains and make sure, again, focusing on the things within their performance environment that they can control. Peer comparison, that's so high here that it's almost, if you can work your way through it at IMG, once you get to the college level, it's not going to be too dissimilar. So this is really set up in a way that it is a baptism of fire, but we hopefully that we put as much support around them. How do we make sure that athletes' confidence is not, or what would I say, is not, diminished completely? Well, that is obviously part of our role. I think fundamentally we have to understand for them, what are we putting confidence in? What are the things that we are attaching our confidence to? If it is purely outcome based, the reality of this place is there's almost always someone better than you, and you will be put on your butt pretty quickly. I always give an example. We had the number one tennis player in the United States come here at U16. So one of the best was the best in the US, came to the academy, and he's not in the top group. Why? Because we had 6 players in the top 15 in the world. So you think you're very good in the United States, and you come here and you're against the best players in the world. So again, that's a forcing function. All of a sudden, you learn humility. You learn that, you know, you're not going to win every match. You are going to get beaten, but we make sure that we've performed. The other thing, Lewis, that we try to do, it is a competitive environment. So I think growing up, you know, you might have one game every week. You know, these athletes play a lot. So you learn quickly how to lose. You learn hopefully how to win, and you learn a lot of lessons along the way. Now, we can't say that those lessons are always, we want to be intentional around those lessons. We want to make sure we reflect on, we make sure that we set them up. But they're going to learn lessons. We just want to make sure they learn the right lessons, because sport can teach some pretty bad lessons too. So all that kind of goes into that, get them to reflect on who they are as a person from their values, make sure they have support system in play, have a competitive environment, learn how to win and lose. And ultimately, if you can't, and I say this tongue in cheek, and I try to measure this with our athletes, but if you can't handle it at a high school level, you will not be able to handle it at a big Division 1 or a professional level. Now, we are here to support you. You have to meet us halfway. If you can't do it at a high school level, you have to reevaluate how good you are and also what your aspirations. Like, if you can't handle it with, you know, 100 people on the sideline, you can't handle it with 90,000 on the sideline. That's the reality. So there's some tough conversations in that piece, and I don't kind of word it like that with athletes, but there's that underlying tone is understanding where you are.
The thing that I find really interesting is, like I mentioned, this Caden Clark. You could look at someone like JJ McCarthy in NFL, right? All the NFL draft athletes that are coming in with the incredible amount of eyes on them. But if you look at statistically, those that have then succeeded once they make it into the professional game, it levels off really quickly. And I've spoken to many professional, and I've experienced this as well. You go from being a young athlete that has done well. I maybe have a slightly different story to others. Like, I never felt like I was good enough, in the sense that I wasn't the best in my team. But there were many athletes that you realize that have been the best in their school, in whatever educational institution, and then they make it pro, they sign that contract, and then you are met with world-class athletes, and you're just one number in that. And that, I don't know if you've come across Will Storr's book, Status Game, and he talks about how a drop in status is one of the biggest indicators for anxiety, depression, and sort of all maladaptive psychological feelings. So I look at that and go, these athletes, I'm just always very curious and just going, okay, you've got an athlete you are putting on a really high status, but that's a high status. It's a pond that they're in, that they've got to actually then go into the ocean. And you're like, okay, once they're in the ocean and potentially you met with a big fish, how do you match up with them? Obviously you can do well, but there are other people in there with high status. You will not be the full attention. It will not be that. And that's a massive part of dealing with it. That is a huge psychological barrier that people are going to have to go off. You got for those watching, the lights just went out. But it's a huge barrier for those athletes to get over. And I don't know. Do you see that being? Do you think athletes in America get pumped up too early in a college level?
I'll address your question with a couple of things that we talk about with our athletes. And I mentioned the term character earlier, that a lot of the external stuff is around reputation and what other people think, and other people are trying to bring their own thoughts and experiences onto you. So we try to be very clear with our athletes that you cannot control that. I'm not saying it doesn't necessarily impact you. Like, we're all human. Some of that, as a young person, is going to impact you. But are you clear? Do you have absolute clarity and support in who you are as a person? Because if you don't, that stuff's just going to overtake you. But if you can be very clear on who you are as a person, how many followers, or if 1 million people choose to follow you, That's their prerogative. You can't do anything about that. So be very conscious of what you own, who the people you surround yourself with, how are you going to approach your work, how are you going to be as a young person, and that's how we try to guide them. Now, is it difficult for some of our young people? Absolutely. You know, one of the conversations I have a lot with athletes when they're doing that peer-to-peer comparison, when it's a 16-year-old, and they say, well, I'm not as good as this player, I'm not as good as this player. Well, you're compared against peers. When do you want to be at your absolute best? So if your goal is to be a college player, and you're 16, well, the reality is you want to be your absolute pinnacle of your performance as a senior in college. So how many more years have you got? You've probably got another 6 or 7 years to reach your peak. If your goal is to be a professional, well, depending on the sport, it could be, if it's golf, you could have another, 15 years, 25 years, depending upon. So you've got a long time to understand where your peak of performance might be. So comparing yourself to your peers is natural, but also understand that that's not the end goal. So if your goal is to be the best in college, realize that you're not going to be the best in college, or you shouldn't aspire to be the best in college as a freshman. You should aspire to be the best as a senior. And as a pro, it depends upon your sport a little bit. So getting them to try and take that long-term view sometimes allows them that breathing space to say, oof, okay, I can take a little bit of pressure off myself. And then the other thing that I talk a lot with athletes about, and, I've probably talked on other podcasts about this, is the idea that I work with athletes around expectations and goals. When it's expectation, we have an expectation mindset. It's I should, I have to, I need to, I must. And when I hear athletes say that, I'm like, okay, there's something going, there's often a lot of external pressure. I need to do this, I have to do this, I must do this. And when you start speaking in that language, obviously, as you know, that invites pressure. That invites us, forward thinking. We're not in the moment where we're anxious about what's about to come up, where we're pressure filled in everything we do. So I really try and recalibrate them to reset on what are the things you want to achieve. Let's have a goal setting mindset. What are the things I want to achieve? And then we talk through goals. We talk through the idea of, setting targets and, just timestamps along that projection of performance, and say, okay, I want to be here at this time. These are things I'm working towards. Well, sometimes we hit our targets, sometimes we don't. What lessons? How do we recalibrate? How do we go again? So reframing the expectations to what do I want to achieve has been really important to some athletes. And sometimes it's the simplest models or the simplest frameworks that we can give athletes that give them that entire switch, because often they have such expectations. And often the expectations are not self-driven. They're driven by, as you alluded to, all those outside things that can impact their journey.
And I think it's not just the peer-to-peer pressure. It's again, use America as an example, the NBA, the NFL, if you want to go to MLB, NHL even, the vision, or the how visual it is to see so much of these high-level athletes, and the misreading of where that athlete currently is to where you currently are is massive. I see athletes here talking about, I need to be as good as, it could be someone like Jofra Archer in cricket here in the UK. It could be, I need to be like a Joe Root. I need to be like, I need to be an Erling Haaland, Man City. And I'm not as good as that. It's like, well, hold on. Where was he when he was your age? Like, what was he doing? That's the interesting question you've got to ask. Where was that athlete that you're aspiring to be like? Where were they when you're at your age right now? And then, rather than comparison, take inspiration from what they were doing. And I spoke to a head of sport here at a school that I work with, and was talking through my journey. And I didn't realize until I was kind of unpacking it with him that that's what I was doing. I would compare, and then I would very quickly go, how do they do what they do? How are they doing it? What is it that I can take from them? I don't care where they are right now. That's great for them. It'd be lovely. I'm not there yet. But what can I do? How can I take it in? And then it turns from something that I'm worried about that I can't control, that causes anxiety, stress, and huge amounts of anxiety, to suddenly, this is in my control. I can actively go and do this. I can go and run away with this and start right now. But if you're only focused on LeBron James turning up in his Beats headphones and doing this. It's like, no, you've missed the years and hours of practice that he's had to do probably where he was at when you were, and he's not turning up with like Beats headphones on then. He is scrapping around on the court. It's like, that's what the reality is probably like, rather than, yeah, if I'm laid back now, mate, I'm pretty sure I'll get there because that's what he does.
Yeah, I think a couple of points and you bring it really well. You know, I often ask our athletes, who are the people that you look up to? Who are those people within their sport? And I think, you know, when you aspire to be a Tiger Woods or a LeBron James or a Roger Federer, there's so much cognitive dissonance between where we are and who they are. Like, there's only going to be one Tiger Woods. So I'm not saying you can't mimic and learn some of his habits. You absolutely can. But think about all the athletes and all the people who made it on the PGA Tour that didn't get Division I scholarships, that pushed their way through challenging circumstances, that made their way through Q school, as an example in golf. Like, those are the people that we can really learn lessons from because they're closer to our situation. Luckily at the Academy, what we often see in each year is like, well, you know, each kind of graduating year, there's athletes that, hey, I was in class with that kid and he's now going to do this, and this, or she's now doing this. So you can see it. It's very tangible because it's so close. And then they often have pro athletes come and train here. So tennis is a great example where we have very high level pros that are based and trained here, and some of our elite juniors get to play with them, and they see their practice habits and they see firsthand what does it take. And when they see those lessons, that's invaluable. So I think you can see it in your peer groups. I think when we have just the aspiration to be one of the very best, that there's just such a gap. It's very hard, but I say, well, we can learn lessons from all these other people who have quote unquote made it and are a little bit closer to your story. And you can also see in your peer group. So, and hopefully we have coaches that have also been there, done it. So we try and guide them and give them some of the lessons, but it's not easy. You know, it is not easy being a young athlete today who's trying to make it in the world of professional sports.
I saw a clip from a podcast. I don't know what podcast it was, but it was a former teammate of Lionel Messi's at Barcelona. I think it was Boateng. And he was talking about how he used to watch him take free kicks. And he's talking about how they would hit 100 he would hit 100 free kicks at the end of training. And he said he would never miss. So he said, I'm not even exaggerating. He said 100 out of 100 he would hit. We're talking top corner, nailing it. And he said that if he missed 2, it wasn't because he missed the target. It was because the keeper made an unbelievable stave. And I think the keeper was like ter Stegen or something like that, who was at the time, world-class keeper. He said, yeah, he might save 1 or 2. But he said then you've got people like Luis Suarez, who is world-class, missing loads, right, comparatively. He said, but an athlete like that, you think he would come off and he would be doing all of these really intricate things to get him to that level of performance. He's like, he'd just come off training, go sit on the massage table, be on his phone, and then the training would rock up and he'd just go out. There are athletes that exist like that are these enigmas within sport. They are just enigmas. And that's what he was getting to. He's like, these are athletes, you've got to leave them alone. And you can't compare yourself to them, because I've had it in cricket. I played with Jofra Archer here, and he's renowned in our sport, cricket, as just someone who is a league above a lot of other athletes. And when you meet him and you work with him, and I've had him on the podcast, he just is. And I remember when I played with him, one of our coaches said, do not compare yourself to him. Great advice early on. It's like, don't compare yourself to him, because I've not seen anything like this before, which is amazing for Jofra. But for you, it's really important to understand that it's like, okay, this is not me. This is not my journey. And there are those athletes that will get to the very, very top. They are unique characters. Now, in that England cricket team, for example, do all 11 of those players have that experience? No. There are players in there that have gritted their way through. They've sometimes not been good enough. They've had interesting journeys, but there just are 1 or 2 that it's just easy for them. And they're the ones you got to leave alone, and they're the special ones, and they're fun, but geez, do not compare yourself to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the example you just gave highlighted everything I said. There's just a few in every sport that everyone looks up to, but they're not necessarily the best examples, because it's unattainable. You know, to be the next Messi, someone will be, But I think there's probably more tangible examples and things that we can learn from that might not be messy like.
So if you were to sit down with an athlete in a room and the athlete's come to you and said, what advice would you give me to get the best out of an academy, to be the best by the end here? What would be some of the pieces of advice you would give to that athlete for them to make it in college, to make it in pro level, to really get themselves into that arena?
You probably won't like the answer to start with, but I've really been conscious over my time here and having sat with a lot of athletes is not to start with advice, because I don't know them and I don't know their experience. However well I may have connected with them. So I'll do my best to ask a lot of questions and really to try and understand and unpack where do they want to go? You know, what does that motivation look like? I want to go to college. I want to be pro. Well, why? Really digging into that, really trying to get an understanding of their background, whether it's financial, their parents, the situation, trying to get a whole picture of who they are. And people unveil themselves if you ask very good questions, but I really want to be an active listener. And I know that probably sounds cliche to some of the listeners, but that's where we want to start. I want to be able to guide, but not advise. So with young people, but what I can speak to, and I won't avoid your question on this, what I can speak to is what have I seen here? And what I've seen here is that the ones that have been incredibly successful, and I've been fortunate enough to see a couple of those athletes that I think are going to be, they might not be that Lionel Messi, they might not be the best ever, but I've seen enough players now and enough athletes to say, okay, they're going to be a very good professional. And that's no small feat. So what do we see from those? Then we see them, one, they're singularly focused and they know where they're going. They don't ascribe to what the crowd is doing. To what I talked about earlier, they don't have that strong sense of I need to do what everyone else is doing. They know, okay, I've got the blinders on or the blinkers on and I'm going to do this, and this. I know what's important. They're very coachable and they really take advantage of all the support services. So the best athletes are the ones that are going to make sure that, you know, they go see their athletic trainers, you know, pre-practice, post-practice. They're going to make sure they're at the strength conditioning. They're going to be on time. They're going to make sure they tap into the mental coach. They're going to make sure that they learn about the character. They're going to dial in on their nutrition. And that's not easy. But we're not talking about, you know, 1,500 athletes. We're talking about a handful that will go on to be at that next level in the end. So you see that. You'll see them take advantage of all the services. They're very singular. They have an extreme confidence in what they're doing. And it usually, and again, I'm going to cast a wide net here, they have a solid foundation from their family. They have a strong support network. Doesn't mean that their parents are heavily involved, because we have parents of all types here. Some that are what you would probably say that try to micromanage a little bit too much. We have parents living in other countries that do not get involved in that, but they are absolutely supportive. So they usually have that strong family, that strong support around them. And then, like I said, I'd probably touch on the last piece is the coach is the fundamental person in the student-athlete experience. So I see from our best athletes, they're curious, they're incredibly coachable, they're open-minded, and they will listen to the people that are put in place. The reason this academy exists is because athletes who have come through here have had success. And I don't think I'm, you know, making any wild claims here. The academy stands on the fact that it's had, you know, 10 number one juniors, 10 number ones in the world that have trained here in tennis. We've had multiple picks in all other sports, et cetera, et cetera. So why? Well, you follow, there's a recipe, for lack of better terms. You follow the path that's set out for you. Now, do you have to do everything the coaches and everybody tells you? No, you can have your own mind, but you also have to lean in. You have to listen. You have to be coachable. So those athletes that do that, those are the ones that I see are incredibly successful. And again, does success mean you're going to be the best pro ever? No, it might just mean you maximize kind of your genes and your where you are at your level, and maybe your maximum is, you know, a Division II tennis scholarship, or maybe it's a Division I, or maybe it's pro. We don't know, and I'm not going to put those limitations on you, but it's about maximizing what you get. So again, support system, make sure they take advantages of all the services, not ascribing to the peer groups and the pressures that are around them, and really have an understanding of who they are and what they want to achieve out of their journey.
What about studies and athletics? So sport work balance. It's a big one that I get from a lot of athletes. So how do they practically manage a sport and a studying balance?
Again, understanding where they want to be on their journey. So some of our athletes want to go to Ivy League school. So maybe for some of our UK listeners, it's, we're talking about Yale, Harvard, Princeton. We're talking about the absolute elite schools in the United States academically. Even if you're amazing athletically, you have to have unbelievable grades. So if that's one of your aspirations, you have to understand that's part of, you have to train in that area of your life just as much as you have to train in the sport area. So you can't avoid that. If your goal is not to, you have to consider what does that next stage look like. And again, there's pretty well worked out formulas. You need to achieve this SAT score. You need to do this with your grades to get to this school. So we can all help, our coaches and our college placement people can help them understand if you want to go to this school at this level, you need to achieve this. So again, it's that simple goal setting piece. For some of our athletes, academics is more important than sports. And for some of our athletes, it's definitely not. And again, that's a decision between the athlete, the family, and what their goal is. So I'm not the person to make that determination, but for me, it's understanding what does that journey look like. And for our coaches, we know early on, and our sport coaches have the conversations. Look, this athlete wants to go to Harvard. They're going to have to miss practice at some point in the season. When it comes to exam times, all of a sudden, academics just becomes more important than sport. And we understand that. We absolutely understand that. And the sport coaches understand that there's going to be a time in a year whereby there's going to be more emphasis placed on academics than there is in sport. Again, not for all of our students, but for certain students, if that's their type of goal. So I would say it's a private school education. The opportunities are there. Does everybody want to do the extra classes and do all the necessary things to go to the best academic schools in the country? No, but it's there if they want to. And we have to understand that some of our athletes balance both. I give an example. We have probably one of our top juniors. He probably could have turned professional tennis, and incredible player from Tibet. And he decided he wanted to go to Princeton, but he's also he could have turned professional. So he had to balance. He was traveling around the world doing junior tournaments while also balancing academics. So it can be done. It is just incredibly difficult to excel in two domains. And that's why those individuals are going to just be high achievers. There's going to be high achievers in life if you can balance that. But again, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. That's not for everybody. So, that's how we try and balance it. It's understanding their journey, their goals. And also, to be honest, Lewis, understanding the family and what the family wants, because that is important in that journey.
Yeah, I have no doubt you're going to have some families that when sent to IMG Academy, they're thinking, that's it, ticket to stardom's happening. We're already in here, so pack your bags. No, it's fascinating. And I get asked, I asked about that question because I get asked about how I balance studying and training. And I have really wrapped my head around it, and I'm trying to still think about what I did. It's almost like a bit of a blur. But I got good grades. I didn't get grades that I definitely should have. But I didn't go to a private school. So as a state school kid, I had real lacking facilities in the sport that I was trying to excel in. So I quite literally would leave school. I would almost run home, and then try to get to a training facility to go and practice, which would be the time in which I would probably need to study. But by the time I had got to 17, 18, I remember being called into an office with a teacher saying, like, look, you're not really excelling in the level that you want. And I still to this day will remember it. I just said, yeah, because I want to be a professional athlete. And like the way she looked at me and just went, that's not a real thing. Like you're not going to be able to sort of do that. I was like, no, I'll do it. And I said, and I remember saying to her, I said, don't worry, I'll get the grades to be able to get into university. And I did get them because I found a way, but I'm just trying to think, like wrap my head around like practically what I did. And it is a commitment. It is a really tough commitment. And I just think of that period as you really get your head down, you really do it. And I was probably blessed that there's not as many distractions now. I didn't have the algorithms tearing me into my device that are really actually like that cannot be, it's no longer an elephant in the room. Like that elephant is the room. Like that's a reality. So I don't think I can even give advice to a young athlete right now in that scenario because I didn't have the challenges, the draws externally, kind of what exists right now.
Yeah. It's, to your point, it is definitely not easy. And we have people with different expertise. We have college placement people that I never had access to. You know, you have access to people who have guided individuals over the last 20 years through their sport journey. So they know what does it take. They can advise, they can support, but ultimately it will come down to the athlete and the parents. So that's part of the value proposition we have here. Is that everything's here. If you want to take advantage of it, then it's here for you to maximize yourself. But not everybody's going to be a professional athlete, and nor should they be. That's why it's profession. It's built for certain people. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, we're coming to the end now, Duncan, and you've started your own podcast. So talk people through your podcast, why it exists, name, everything. Go nuts there, mate.
Yeah, I wanted to scratch an itch. I wasn't talking enough mental performance in my day-to-day. I wanted to do my own podcast. And I think I'd had the idea of doing a podcast for a long time. And I wanted to combine myself and my colleague, Dr. Greg Young, combine our area of interest. So I love reading. I love athlete autobiographies. I love stories. And I think, hopefully I have, a lot of experience in the mental performance field. How do we combine the two? So our podcast is called Performers. You can find it on, all the usual channels. Performers. And what we do is we read an autobiography and we break down, what are some of the lessons that we can take from that autobiography and apply to our own lives. So we're 10 episodes in. There's lots of learnings. It's not easy, but it's incredible it's incredibly rewarding trying to pick out the nuances and trying to pick out the lessons from each person's story. And everybody's a little bit differently, but there's threads that run through everybody's story. So we've done a range of athletes, a couple of coaches, and, would love your support. If you want to pop over to Spotify or Apple or even on YouTube, I'd love you to pop along and, feel free to watch or listen to a couple of episodes.
Have you thought about branching into documentaries, sort of distilling the documentary series and biopics, I guess?
Yeah, I think the long-term vision for me is we call it Performers quite deliberately because we're looking to ultimately branch into other performance domains. Our expertise is within sport and coaching, but we have an interest in the arts and music. We have an interest in other domains whereby people who have excelled as performers. So we've kept it pretty broad. And we specifically address autobiographies as opposed to biographies. There might be some daylight there. We want to hear the athlete in their own words. So we make sure that, if you have, some of our athletes have ghostwriters, but ultimately we want to hear their own words because that's incredibly powerful. Documentaries, I haven't really thought about that too much, Lewis. I think we have a lot ahead of us. We're only 10 episodes in. I think that's an interesting idea to break down. There's some amazing series on Netflix. So, I'm open to it. I think we still have a lot of books to get through, but maybe there's the odd episode where we break down a documentary.
Just less reading, mate. That's all.
Yeah,
is it?
That's it.
I always ask guests, is there anything you're reading, watching, or listening to at the moment that is currently inspiring you?
Yeah, my time, because we're reading a book and doing a podcast every 2 weeks. So if you can imagine, over the course of the year, that'll be 26 books. So that is taking all my time. I just finished Alex Honnold's book, The Free Solo Climber, Alone on the Wall. We've got a few lined up. So right now, I can't say I'm doing too much outside reading except for the podcast, but those books in themselves, we just did episode 9 on Chrissy Wellington. who, amazing story as I'm a triathlete. We just did Pele, so listening, reading their stories is the work that I'm doing right now. So not a lot beyond that, I'm afraid.
Have you done Agassiz yet?
Agassi was number one.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. So I think I'd watched episode 3, but episode 1 being Agassi, that's still probably one of my favorites so far.
Yeah.
As in a book that I've read. I've obviously not listened to your distilling it, but it's geez, even just the opening page of that, it's raw.
Yeah, Agassiz is unbelievable. I think, like I said, I really enjoyed Chrissy Wellington's, and we've had a few others along the way. That Mike Tyson's was a just unbelievable story. It was also 600 pages, so that was a baptism of fire to get through 600 pages and get a podcast recorded all about it. But Tyson's story, as I'm sure you can imagine, is absolutely insane, but so many lessons, both what to do. We try to distill the lessons of high performance, but also what are the pitfalls and what are the things high performers can avoid doing. And there's those lessons in everybody's story, obviously with Agassi, but Mike Tyson has a lot of things to avoid.
Yeah, and the last thing I always ask is what sort of, from our conversation today, what if there was a challenge you could put forward to listeners, what would be that challenge based on what we've spoken about today?
I think probably something we've touched on in different ways, and I've seen in the lessons of a lot of high performers is, find that person, find a mentor, find someone you could ask about, whether it's a coach, whether it's a parent, whether it's sometimes it's a peer, but usually it's an older person, someone who's been there, done it. Find that person that can mentor you through this path of high performance. It's not easy, and nobody does it alone. So you need to find that person, and it might take you a few different ways to find the right person. You won't connect with every coach. You won't connect with, necessarily, you might not connect with your parents, but you'll find someone. So I think be open-minded to the people you can learn from. I think the power of this podcast, Lewis, and the work that you're doing is that you're sending out and you're providing so much value to the community for young people and coaches that they don't have to do any work. They sit, they plug in, and they listen to hopefully some really valuable advice from someone like yourself who's been there, done it. So again, find a mentor, but also, read, listen, watch. Try and get as much information in as possible. You don't have to enact on every piece of information, but I think people who don't read, people who don't listen to podcasts, people who don't, try and learn about their performance domain, I think you're going to be incredibly limited. And I think something, this podcast that you're doing just provides just so much value, and it's free. You don't have to pay anything. So that if I'm going to plug anything, listen to podcasts like this.
Yeah, I think as well, the next level I would add is, and I've spoken to many, I've stopped really reading any self-development book, for example, because at the end of the day, they're all saying the same thing. They're all telling you exactly what you need to be doing. The next step is action, is like, what do you actually do? And a definite guide, a definite direction I'm trying to take the podcast in, maybe over the next 12 months, is just bringing some form of practical guide for people to, like, right, when you stop listening to this show, like, go and do something, because that's where you'll start to see the change, is where you'll start to feel better. Whatever motivation or need you have listening is to go and actually do something about it. And that's the important thing. So for me, it's while providing the information is great, I just put that challenge to people, like, go do something. Rubber hit the road, go actually change what it is you need to change, rather than pick up another self-development book and be like, well, I know this to be true. Like, I know this is what I need to be doing. Like, if you're going to listen to something new, it's either going to give you some new piece of information to improve what you're doing and take that, or inspire to take that action, or at least give you the security that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think to sum that up, Lewis, learning is a change of behavior. So learning in itself is valuable, but if it's not going to impact or change your behavior, it's probably not true learning. You haven't transferred that into action. So make sure that you get concrete on what are the behaviors and what are the actions you're going to take.
Look, it's been great having you on, Duncan. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Really enjoyed it, Lewis.